It's easy to understand why we might think that 1-point perspective is going to be easier than 2-point perspective. I mean, there's twice as many points in 2-point perspective, so it has to be twice as hard, doesn't it? Well, I don't actually think it works that way. In fact, I think 1-point perspective, as we traditionally think of it, which is this sort of street scene, has far more challenges than 2-point perspective. Let me talk you through some of them with this demo, and also give you some ideas of how to overcome them or compensate for them, or at least just things to look out for and be prepared to pay particular attention to. Especially when we're drawing freehand in ink, so every mark's going to be here at the end. This drawing took me 70 minutes in real time to draw, 1 hour 10 minutes, so you're watching most of this at 4 times drawing speed. When I come to do the hatching at the end, I speed it up a little bit more. But here we are with this wonderful street scene in Florence with the Duomo, the cathedral, peeking through the end of the alleyway. I think the most obviously challenging thing about 1-point perspective is that invariably we end up with lines that in life are representing horizontal surfaces along the buildings. In 1-point perspective can end up being almost vertical lines. Not so much what I'm drawing now even, but look at the awning on the other side of the street. It's virtually a vertical line. And partly because we have other understanding of how these buildings look and what the different pieces are, it can be hard to appreciate that when we're drawing this, we need to draw a very steep angle. The other issue is that with 2-point perspective, we can understand how we have a horizontal line that goes across the whole scene at eye level, and then we get this fan-shaped pattern that means every horizontal line above eye level increases in angle slightly. Well, that is obviously true for 1-point perspective as well, except how it looks is far more extreme because our fan-shaped lines continue, if you like, around the circle for a lot further than in most 2-point perspective scenes. And we don't have to have many stories in a building to have a lot of lines that rapidly increase in angle. And even with a relatively short street such as this, the thickness of various elements such as windows at one end and how sort of the height of them and how high they are at the other end can be a large difference, a big change from one end to the other. And yet we have to keep the fan-shaped pattern happening in the right proportion. We have to have the angles increase in angle at just the right angle so that the visual flow is nice and calm. It reads the way we expect it to read. We don't feel, oh, something's not quite right here. Now, you'll see what I do. I put a dot when I think I've visualized where one end of a line or a row of objects that are in a line, such as these windows, might be. And then either I measure with the actual pen or I visualize more closely now where that line's going to start and where my dot is with the reference and think, is it looking the same? The other thing, of course, is that it's not just the heights that reduce, because as these buildings move away from us, they get smaller, but it's the width that reduces as well. It's the foreshortening. So the windows down the wall and the gaps between them get narrower and narrower and narrower. And if we're not careful, we can try and overdraw the windows, draw too much detail because we can see it in the reference. But we actually don't have enough space to draw it with a pen that has a line width, even a relatively narrow line width as this 0.1 millimeter that I'm using now. I did start with a 0.2. I jumped between a 0.1 and a 0.2 at different times in this. So you can see how those windows have simply become straight lines that get closer and closer next to each other. So that's another challenge for shortening. And on the other side of the street, it's even more severe, both for the perspective angles and for the foreshortening. And that's because we're closer to the wall, which means it's moving away from us faster and further, so to speak, which means that the perspective works more intensely. The heights get shorter faster as it moves away, and the widths get narrower faster as it moves away from us as well. So we have a more extreme perspective to draw, which can be tricky to just rejig our thinking and not to tend to just do it the same. The angles on the two sides would have been the same if we'd been standing the same distance from each wall of the buildings. But when this photo was taken, the person was standing much closer to the building on the right. So we don't have the same angles, and so especially when we draw the shallower angle first, not that it's a shallow angle, we need to be really on the lookout for that. And even just some of the deformed shapes, as I think of them, that we have. If you look at these windows, now we know those windows are rectangular, but if you actually were to cut out each of these windows with a pair of scissors, it would be a very pointy diamond. Some of them, and some of them just very, very thin, pointy, skewed parallelograms. So that can also be hard to do because we know that it's a rectangle and it can make us want to do lines that aren't quite as skewed as they need to be. Another important thing with one-point perspective is scale. Now, scale is the relative size of one thing to another. So what we want to make sure is our people who are in the street look like they could walk into the buildings on each side of the street, and that they also look as though they line up with each other. Now, because this ground is flat, all of the heads, and because the photographer is at the same level in the street as the people in the street, all the heads basically line up with eye level. Draw a line, horizontal line through all their heads, and that's where all of these horizontal lines will converge, give or take a tiny bit, at the one vanishing point here. That's important to be visualizing as we draw, but we need to make sure that as the people go back on each side, that they look right with each other. Now, in this scene, it's a little bit skewed because the building on the right-hand side is actually quite a large monumental building. It could have been, well, I think it probably clearly was, the city residence of a very wealthy person. And so the proportions are more palace than shopfront. If you look at the size of just the height of the ground floor with the right side compared to the left side, much higher. The window, fancy stonework around it, very large, very different to the more domestic scale across the road. So the scale of the building is different. Look how small the people look in relation to those windows compared to on the other side of the road. So we do need to just be aware of particular peculiarities with the scale of what we're drawing. In this case, the building on the right-hand side is actually a much larger scale for a person than all the buildings on the left. So that can make it look a bit odd. But the other thing to realize too is that on the right-hand side, that closest window is actually closer to us than anything that we see on the left-hand side of the road. Again, because of the angle being different on the left-hand side, because we're not standing directly between the two buildings. So there's that to just be aware of as well. Now, another important thing usually with one-point perspective is shadows. Particularly when we draw this sort of street scene, unless the sun is directly overhead, and even then it can still cast some shadows, it's usually on one side or the other, which means that one wall is shaded in this case, it's the right-hand wall, and the other wall has direct sunshine hitting it. However, there's also often a shadow being cast by the shaded wall that may actually go across the road and hit the wall on the right-hand side, now on the left-hand side in this case. Now here, it's just actually up the far end of this street, but there's an awning above some of the windows there, and that's casting a shadow, which makes a difference. Now, we can choose not to draw them, but again, often the drama, the visual interest in what we see is caused by this lighting effect as well. The extreme angles, the extremes, lights and darks, the extreme shifts in how things look. All these things add up to the interest in a scene. The other thing that's affected by the light is the cathedral at the end of the street. Because of the brightness of the sun, and it does get this really faded look there. So when I draw it, I want to capture that light effect, but I also want to draw it in a way that it feels like it's sitting further back than what we have at the end of this street. So all these considerations as we draw this, because we want to get the sense of a long, narrow tunnel of really interesting Italian buildings, Italian Renaissance buildings, and then this looming cathedral at the end of the street that we just get a glimpse of. Because, well, that's part of the charm of Florence. Now, I don't know if you know the difference between shade and shadows, but shade is, say, the building on the right. It's darker because the light can't reach it. Shadow is cast. Shadow is where the light hits another subject, and so that light can't reach another subject. Therefore, the roadway is in shadow. The bottom wall in the distance on the left-hand side is in shadow. And shadow is darker, has a darker value than shade. And not only that, but shadow has cool undertones, and shade has warm undertones. So that's very helpful if you're using watercolor, just to give an idea of what undertones to put in the shadow colors, whichever ones you use. So I've switched to a 0.05 here because I really want to have a really light effect in the distance. I had originally thought that I would change to a lighter pen for the far end of the street, but I decided in the end not to do that, not to worry about that, because I felt it was going to look okay the way it was going. Please hit the like button if you're finding this interesting. I really enjoyed this drawing. So now we come to this very fast hatching, great little trick using the paper to get a nice hard edge there when we're doing our hatching. So this is at 8 times my drawing speed. So if you'd like to see this at a slower rate, you can use that cog icon. Please hit that like button if you haven't already. And if you'd like to have a go drawing this yourself, then the link to this reference photo is in the description of the video below. So why not have a go and maybe just do part of it, just do part of the left or the right hand side. We don't need to draw a whole scene to use the available time we've got and to really benefit in learning to draw. Remember, if we're learning to draw, we're not producing artworks. We're doing certain exercises and practices to improve our skills, to improve our observation, to improve our understanding of how the medium, in this case the ink fine liner, works, and the effects we can create and build with those materials for the sorts of subjects that we like to draw. And we don't have to draw the whole scene to have a very productive session. In fact, shorter sessions that we pay more attention to, are fresher, have more energy for, and can do more frequently will be far more helpful than much longer but much more infrequent ones. So why not give that a go as well? And we're just about done with this lovely Florentine street with just that hint of the Duomo at the other end. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I really hope you have a go drawing this. 1 point perspective, there's nothing easy about it. In fact, I find it more challenging than 2 or 3 point for that matter. But why not have a go? We get some great scenes with this sort of perspective. But in the end, whatever you draw, however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.